The morphine made everything foggy, but I heard my son Douglas clearly when he whispered those words while pulling the plug from my oxygen machine. Through barely open eyes, I watched him check his watch, waiting for me to die. After 40 years of raising him, sacrificing everything for his education and future, this was how he repaid me. I let my breathing slow, played dead, and listened as he made a phone call that revealed everything. What I heard next changed my life forever. My name is Murray, and for 68 years I believed I had built the perfect American family. My construction company started with just a pickup truck, and a toolbox grew into one of the largest in the state. But my greatest pride wasn't the business. It was my eldest son, Douglas. From the moment he could walk, Douglas exceeded every expectation. While other kids played video games, he studied. Valedictorian of his high school class, full scholarship to Harvard Law, recruited by the most prestigious firm in Boston before graduation. I used to joke with my golf buddies that Douglas was my retirement plan, not because I needed his money, but because knowing he was successful meant I had succeeded as a father. 5 years ago, when Martha passed away from cancer, Douglas stepped up in ways that made me love him even more. He flew in from Boston every weekend during her final months, held her hand through chemotherapy, arranged the best specialists money could buy. After the funeral, when grief threatened to swallow me whole, Douglas took charge of my affairs. "Dad, you need to focus on healing," he said, organizing my papers in the study where Martha used to read her mystery novels. "Let me handle the financial stuff for a while. You've done enough for this family." How could I refuse? This was my golden boy, the son who called every Sunday, who named his firstborn after me. When Jennifer, his wife, suggested they move back from Boston to be closer, I thought God was rewarding me for a life well lived. The pneumonia hit me 3 months ago. What started as a persistent cough escalated into nights where I felt like I was drowning in my own lungs. Douglas drove me to the hospital himself, refusing to wait for an ambulance. "My father needs the best room you have," he told the admissions nurse, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Money is no object." As I lay in that hospital bed, tubes running into my arms, oxygen mask strapped to my face, I watched my son transform into a caregiver. Every morning at 7 sharp, Douglas arrived with fresh flowers and the newspaper. He'd pull the chair close to my bed and read me the sports section, just like I used to read him bedtime stories. The nurses adored him. "You're so lucky," they'd whisper during their rounds. Most children barely visit once a week. But small things started to feel off, like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. One afternoon, Nurse Patricia mentioned something odd while adjusting my IV. "Your son certainly asks a lot of medical questions," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Yesterday he wanted to know about survival rates, life expectancy with your condition, even how the equipment works. Most family members just want to know when their loved one can go home." I brushed it off. Douglas had always been thorough, detail-oriented. It's what made him a brilliant lawyer. During one visit, I noticed him reviewing documents while he thought I was sleeping. The morphine made me drowsy, but not blind. The papers looked like insurance forms, maybe property deeds. When I stirred, he quickly tucked them into his briefcase. "Just work stuff, Dad," he said when I asked. "You know how it is, billable hours, wait for no one." A few days later, I overheard him in the hallway with Jennifer. Their voices carried through the thin hospital walls. "The timing has to be right," Jennifer said. "We can't rush this." "I know," Douglas replied. "But the longer this drags on, the more complicated things get. The medical bills alone are eating through everything." Medical bills. I had excellent insurance and more than enough savings. Why would Douglas worry about money? My breathing grew worse, and Dr. Harrison upgraded me to continuous oxygen support. The machine beside my bed became my lifeline, its steady hum the soundtrack to my days. Douglas insisted on moving me to a private room in the far corner of the ward. You need peace and quiet to recover," he explained, though the new room felt more isolated than peaceful. My younger son, Brian, called from Portland that week. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the argument at Christmas, when Douglas accused him of being a failure for choosing art over law. "How are you doing, Dad?" Brian's voice sounded strained through the phone. "Getting by," I wheezed. "Your brother's taking good care of me." There was a long pause. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Douglas. He's not who you think he is." "Not this again, Brian. Your brother has done nothing but help this family while you've been playing with paintbrushes in Oregon." "That's exactly what he wants you to think. Dad, please just be careful. Things aren't adding up. I've been hearing things from Mom's sister about the weeks before she died about Douglas and the medications." I hung up on him. How dare he use his mother's death to attack his brother? Jealousy had poisoned Brian since childhood, always in Douglas's shadow, always falling short. I wouldn't let him taint the one good thing keeping me afloat. The next morning, Douglas arrived with a stack of legal documents. "Just some paperwork to simplify things," he said, producing an expensive pen from his jacket. "Power of attorney, updated beneficiary forms, that sort of thing. Nothing major, but it's better to handle this stuff while you're lucid." I was exhausted from a night of coughing my chest, feeling like someone had parked a truck on it. The papers blurred before my eyes. "What about the will?" I asked, remembering Murray Jr., my grandson and namesake. "We'll deal with that later," Douglas assured me, guiding my hand to the signature lines. "This is just temporary, making sure someone can pay your bills and manage the company while you recover." I signed where he pointed, trusting the boy I'd raised, the man who'd made me proud every day of his life. Jennifer stood by the window, texting on her phone, occasionally glancing at us with an expression I couldn't read. "Perfect," Douglas said, carefully organizing the signed documents. "Now you just focus on getting better. Jennifer and I are planning a big family vacation once you're out of here. Maybe that fishing lodge in Montana you always talked about." As they prepared to leave, Jennifer approached my bed for the first time in days. She leaned down, her perfume overwhelming, and patted my hand. "Get well soon, Murray," she said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're all counting on it." Something in her tone made my skin crawl, but the medication was pulling me under again. As I drifted off, I heard them whispering by the door. "How much longer?" Jennifer asked. "Soon," Douglas replied. "Everything's in place. We just need to be patient a little while longer." The last thing I saw before sleep took me was my son checking his watch, calculating something I didn't yet understand. If only I had known then what those calculations meant. How every visit, every kind gesture was just another step in a plan that would almost cost me everything. The night nurse Carla had a gentle way about her that reminded me of Martha. She was adjusting my medication when she made an offhand comment that would save my life. "You know, Mr. Murray, this sedative is peculiar," she said, examining the IV bag. "It makes patients appear completely unconscious, but studies show they can still hear everything around them. Fascinating how the brain works, isn't it? Some of my patients have told me they remembered entire conversations from when their families thought they were sleeping." I filed that information away, not knowing how crucial it would become just hours later. That evening arrived like any other, except Douglas came alone, and later than usual around 10:30, when the ward had settled into its nighttime quiet. I heard him exchange pleasantries with the skeleton crew at the nurse's station, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor toward my room. Through slitted eyes, I watched him enter and carefully close the door behind him. Instead of his usual seat beside my bed, he stood there for a long moment, studying me. His face looked different in the harsh fluorescent light, angular and cold, nothing like the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. "Dad," he whispered, leaning close. "Can you hear me?" I kept my breathing steady, deep, letting the machines do their rhythmic work. Satisfied, Douglas straightened and moved toward my oxygen machine. His hand hovered over the cord that connected me to life itself. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," he muttered, though his voice carried no regret, only determination. but you've lived a good life. Longer than most. It's time." My mind screamed as his fingers wrapped around the plug, but my body remained still. Years of military training kicked in muscle memory from Vietnam, where playing dead could mean the difference between coming home and a flag-draped coffin. I forced my panic down, controlled my breathing, prepared for what was coming. The machines went silent. Douglas leaned over me, his breath hot against my ear. "This is your last breath, Dad." Every instinct told me to gasp, to fight, to grab his throat and demand answers. Instead, I drew on reserves of discipline I hadn't used in 50 years. Slow the heart rate. Minimize oxygen consumption. The human body can survive without air longer than most people think, especially when you're not panicking. Douglas pulled a chair close and sat down, checking his watch. He was timing my death. 1 minute passed. 2. My lungs began to burn, but I held on. Douglas shifted in his seat, pulled out his phone. 3 minutes. The edge of my vision started to darken. 4 minutes. Just when I thought I couldn't last another second, Douglas stood and placed 2 fingers on my neck, checking for a pulse. I went completely limp, letting my head loll to the side, my mouth falling open. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard him exhale with satisfaction. "Finally," he said, and dialed a number on his phone. What I heard next shattered whatever remained of my heart. "It's done," Douglas said, his voice businesslike. "He'll be gone within minutes. No, the nurses won't check on him until morning shift. I made sure of that." A pause while someone responded. $3 million in life insurance split between the 2 policies. The properties transfer automatically with the power of attorney he signed. Another $2 million in assets, maybe more, once we liquidate the company. My dead wife's jewelry, my father's pocket watch, 40 years of building a business, saving every penny, all reduced to numbers in my son's mouth. The safe. Yeah, I've got the combination. He told Mom years ago, and she told me before she died. At least $500,000 in gold coins and cash. Paranoid old man never trusted banks completely. Before she died. The words echoed in my mind. Martha had been sick, yes, but the doctors said she had months, maybe a year. Then suddenly, she was gone. "No, Brian won't be a problem. I've already had papers drawn up contesting any will that leaves him anything. Abandonment of an aging parent, failure to provide care, mental instability due to his artistic lifestyle. No judge will side with him over the devoted son who moved back home to care for dear old Dad." He laughed, then a sound I'd never heard from him before. Cruel, calculating. The best part, this pneumonia wasn't even that serious at first. Amazing what a little something extra in his food can do. Weakens the immune system, makes a minor infection life-threatening. 6 weeks of careful dosing, and here we are. My stomach turned. Those home-cooked meals Douglas brought, insisting the hospital food wasn't nutritious enough. The bitter aftertaste I'd attributed to medication. "Jennifer's here now," he continued. "We'll play the grieving family, collect everything, and be in Cabo by next weekend. After everything I've put up with playing the perfect son for that insufferable old fool, we've earned it." Footsteps in the hallway. Jennifer entered, her heels clicking on the linoleum. "Is it over?" she asked, not even looking at my supposedly dead body. "Almost. Give it another few minutes to be sure. How's your boyfriend?" She laughed. "Harrison's ready. He'll sign the death certificate, no autopsy required. Natural causes, complications from pneumonia. Clean and simple. Dr. Harrison, my doctor, the one who'd been treating me for weeks. Good. I'm tired of sneaking around. Once this is settled and we're divorced on paper, you two can go public. Everyone will understand the grieving widow finding comfort with the man who tried so hard to save her father-in-law. They actually practiced their performance right there beside what they thought was my corpse. Jennifer worked up some tears, while Douglas perfected his broken voice. He was the best father anyone could ask for. Douglas said, then burst out laughing. God, can you imagine the old bastard thought I actually cared about those fishing trips and baseball games? What about the staff? Jennifer asked. Someone might get suspicious about the oxygen being unplugged. Already handled. I've been complaining to hospital administration about equipment malfunctions for weeks, documenting every little beep and error message. When they find him in the morning, it'll be another tragic accident. Lawsuits will fly, but that's their problem. They stayed for another 10 minutes discussing funeral arrangements, who to notify first, how to handle my business partners. My lungs screamed for air, but rage kept me still. They went through my entire life, like vultures dividing a carcass, deciding which pieces were worth keeping. The house in Aspen, Jennifer asked. Sell it. Too many memories and Brian knows about it. The boat, the cars, anything traceable goes to auction. We'll keep the offshore accounts I've been setting up. Offshore accounts, with my money. What about the grandchildren? Jennifer said, and for a moment I hoped she had some shred of humanity left. They'll adjust. Kids are resilient. Besides, with what we're inheriting, they'll never want for anything. Except a father who wasn't a murderer. Grandparents who were still alive. Finally, mercifully, they prepared to leave. Douglas approached my bed one last time, straightening my blanket with mock tenderness. Goodbye, Dad, he said loudly, in case anyone was listening outside. I love you. The door closed. I counted to 60 twice, then allowed myself the smallest sip of air through barely parted lips. Then another. My lungs burned like fire, but I was alive. Alive and furious. I waited 10 more minutes before hitting the emergency call button, gasping and coughing for effect, when the nurses rushed in. The machine, I wheezed, pointing at the unplugged cord. It just stopped working. As they reconnected my oxygen and fussed over my vitals, checking for damage, one thought consumed me. Douglas had killed Martha. My beloved wife hadn't died of cancer. She'd been murdered by our own son. And now he'd tried to kill me too. But Douglas had made one fatal mistake. He'd assumed I was just a weak old man, too trusting and too sick to fight back. He'd forgotten that before I was a businessman, before I was a father, I was a soldier. And soldiers know how to wage war. 15 minutes after the nurses restored my oxygen and left, I pressed the call button again. When Patricia arrived, I gestured for her to come close. I need a different nurse for the night shift, I whispered. Someone Douglas hasn't met. Someone discreet. She must have seen something in my eyes, because she nodded without questions. 20 minutes later, a young man named Marcus arrived, someone from a different wing who'd never encountered my son. Marcus, I said, my voice stronger now with anger fueling me. I need you to do something unusual. Can I trust you? I took an oath to protect my patients, Mr. Murray. What do you need? First, bring me a burner phone. Pay cash. Second, I need you to help me record something on my regular phone, then hide it where no one will look. While Marcus went to get the phone, I recorded everything I'd overheard, every detail about Douglas's confession, the poisoning Martha's murder. My hands shook with rage, but my voice remained steady. This would be evidence proof of what my son had become. When Marcus returned with a simple prepaid phone, I made my first call to Jake Richardson, my buddy from Vietnam, who'd become a private investigator after the war. Jake answered on the third ring, gravelly voice unchanged by the decades. Murray, that you hell, it's past midnight. Jake, I need you. Full tactical support. My son's trying to kill me. There was silence then. Where are you? Regional Medical 4th floor, room 428. Come in quiet, he can't know. Roger that, Oscar Mike and 30 mics. Old habits, old language. Oscar Mike on the move. 30 mics, 30 minutes. Some things you never forget. Next, I called Samuel Goldstein, who'd been my lawyer before Douglas was even born. Sam had written my first will, handled every contract, as my business grew, stood as Murray Jr.'s godfather. Sam, it's Murray. I know it's late. Murray, you sound terrible. How's the pneumonia? Forget the pneumonia. I need you to do something immediately. Change my will. Everything goes to charity except for trusts for the grandchildren. Douglas gets nothing. Brian gets nothing. Make it ironclad. Murray, what's going on? You can't make major decisions while you're sick and on medication. Sam Douglas unplugged my oxygen machine tonight. He's been poisoning me. He might have killed Martha. I have proof, but I need to protect my assets first. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. I'll have documents ready by morning, Sam finally said. I'm also calling my nephew at the FBI. This is beyond estate planning. My third call went to Brian. My younger son answered immediately like he'd been waiting. Tundet, are you okay? It's 1 a.m. Brian, I need you to listen carefully. You were right about Douglas. I heard him sit up, covers rustling. What happened? He tried to kill me tonight. I need you to come home, but secretly. Don't fly into the main airport. Rent a car with cash. Stay at the Riverside Motel under a fake name. Dad, I can be there by tomorrow night. Should I call the police? Not yet. I need more evidence first. Douglas has been planning this for years. We get one shot at this. I knew it. Brian's voice cracked. Mom called me the week before she died. She said Douglas was acting strange, bringing her special vitamins, insisting she'd take them. I should have come home then. We'll make this right, son, for your mother. My last call was to Richard Sterling, my bank manager for 20 years. Richard, I need you to freeze all accounts Douglas has access to. Move everything to new accounts in my name only. Do it now tonight. Murray, that's highly irregular. We'd need proper documentation. Check your fax machine in 10 minutes. My lawyer's sending everything you need. Richard, my son's trying to kill me for the inheritance. Every minute counts. Dear God, I'll handle it personally. Douglas won't be able to touch a penny. Jake arrived exactly when promised, dressed in janitor's coveralls, pushing a cleaning cart. Age had turned his hair white and added a limp from an old shrapnel wound, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. Perimeter's clear. He reported, closing the door. Your boy left 2 hours ago. Now brief me. I told him everything. Jake's face darkened with each detail, especially when I mentioned Martha. That son of a bitch, he growled. Martha made the best apple pie in 3 states. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. First, defensive positions. From his cart, he produced tiny cameras, hiding them around my room with practiced efficiency. One in the air vent, another behind the picture frame, a third in the bathroom. All connected to a recording system in his cart. Now, offensive intel, he continued. I'll background Douglas' last 6 months intensive. Financial records, phone records, movements. If he's got gambling debts or a mistress or both, I'll find them. His wife mentioned offshore accounts. Even better, follow the money, find the crime. What else? The food. He's been bringing me meals, said hospital food wasn't good enough. I think that's how he's been poisoning me. Jake pulled evidence bags from his cart. Where's your trash? We found the remains of yesterday's lunch, Douglas's special homemade soup, in a Tupperware container. Jake bagged it along with utensils and napkins. I've got a lab guy who owes me favors, he said. We'll know what's in this by tomorrow afternoon. Before leaving, Jake set up a tablet where I could monitor the camera feeds. Your boy shows up, you play dead like tonight. Let him incriminate himself. Every word, every action we're recording. And Murray, he gripped my shoulder. We're gonna nail this bastard to the wall. The next morning brought revelations like body blows. Jake called with his initial findings. Your boy's in deep shit, Murray. Lost his job at the law firm 6 months ago. Embezzlement. They kept it quiet to avoid scandal, but he's been pretending to go to work ever since. What? Gets better. Or worse. He owes 300 grand to some very unfriendly people. Been paying them off with money skimmed from your accounts. The forensic accountant I use found a paper trail. He's been bleeding you dry 50 grand here, 30 there, hoping you'd die before you noticed. What about Jennifer? Regular appointments with Dr. Harrison, but not for medical reasons. My guy followed her yesterday. They've got a love nest apartment downtown. She's been planning to leave Douglas as soon as you're dead and the money's secured. I thought of my grandchildren, innocent victims in this nightmare. My God, Jake. How did I miss all this? Psychopaths are good at masks, Murray. He showed you what you wanted to see. Don't blame yourself. Blame the bastard who betrayed you." That afternoon, the lab results came back. Jake read them over the phone, voice tight with anger. "Arsenic," he said. "Small doses enough to cause symptoms, but not kill immediately. Classic poisoner's method. Builds up over time, looks like natural illness. Your boy learned from someone who knew their chemistry." "Can we prove he put it there?" "Already on it. Pulled security footage from the hospital kitchen. He's on camera adding something to your soup. Idiots never look up, never see the cameras." As we planned our next moves, I watched Douglas on the tablet feed. He was in my house, my study, going through my files. Looking for the safe combination, probably, or documents he could forge. The irony was beautiful. He'd taught me about modern security systems, insisted I upgrade everything for my protection. Now those same cameras would destroy him. Sam arrived that evening with the new will and a surprise guest, his nephew David from the FBI's white-collar crime division. "Mr. Murray," David said, reviewing our evidence, "this is enough to start a federal investigation. Attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement. With your permission, we'd like to run a sting operation." "What did you have in mind?" "Let him think he's succeeded. We'll monitor everything, build an airtight case. When he tries to collect on the insurance or access the accounts, we'll have him dead to rights. The doctor, the wife, anyone else involved goes down too." I signed the papers Sam brought, making sure my legitimate heirs would be protected. The grandchildren would receive trusts. Brian would get the company. Everything else would go to Martha's favorite charities and a new foundation for elder abuse victims. As for Douglas, he'd get exactly what he deserved, a cage. That night, I lay in bed, watching the camera feeds, seeing my son for what he truly was. Not the golden boy I'd created in my mind, but a monster who'd killed his mother and tried to kill his father for money. The silent wolf was awake now, and he was hungry for justice. 3 days into our operation, everything was in place. Jake had installed cameras throughout my house after discovering Douglas had keys to every property I owned. The FBI had tapped his phones and frozen the offshore accounts he didn't know we'd found. Most importantly, Dr. Harrison's medical license was secretly under review, though he remained unaware. It was time to bait the trap. "Tell Douglas my vitals are crashing," I instructed Marcus. "Make it sound urgent but not suspicious. Let him think his poison is finally winning." The call went out at 8 that evening. I watched on the tablet as Douglas received it at home, fighting to hide his excitement from the children. "Daddy has to go see Grandpa," he told Emma and Ryan. "Be good for the babysitter." He drove exactly the speed limit, cautious even in his eagerness. Jennifer followed in her own car 10 minutes later. Dr. Harrison was already on shift, ready to play his part in their murderous theater. I had Jake's tech friend manipulate my monitors to show declining vitals, heart rate dropping, oxygen levels failing, blood pressure unstable. When Douglas burst through the door with perfectly calculated concern, I was ready. "Dad!" He rushed to my bedside, gripping my hand. "I'm here. Can you hear me?" Through slitted eyes, I watched him check the monitors, satisfaction flickering across his features. Behind him, Jennifer slipped in quietly, designer purse, clutched like a weapon. "His numbers are dropping fast," Dr. Harrison announced, playing the worried physician. "I don't think he has much time." Douglas leaned closer, and I let my eyes flutter open, making my voice weak and raspy. "Douglas, my son. I'm here, Dad. Everything's going to be okay." The lie came so easily to him. I wondered how many times he'd lied to Martha as she lay dying. "Need to tell you," I gasped, letting my hand shake as I reached for his. "About the money?" His grip tightened instantly. "What about the money, Dad?" "More than, hidden where..." The mask slipped for just a moment, raw greed replacing concern. "Where is it hidden?" I let my breathing become more labored, each word a struggle. "Changed. Everything. The truth about what Dad stay with me. What truth?" But I let my eyes roll back, body convulsing once before the monitors flatlined. Jake's device worked perfectly, showing cardiac arrest while leaving my actual heart beating steadily. No. Douglas shook my shoulders. What did you change? Where's the money? He's gone, Dr. Harrison announced after a token check of my vitals. Time of death 9:47 p.m. The transformation was instant. Douglas released my hand like it burned him, stepping back with Jennifer to share a look of barely contained triumph. We need to call Brian, Jennifer said, already pulling out her phone. And the funeral home, the one we discussed? Pinewood Memorial. Douglas confirmed. They're expecting us. Closed casket cremation within 48 hours. They were so efficient, so prepared. My death had been scheduled like a business meeting. I'll handle the death certificate, Harrison said. Complications from pneumonia secondary infection. No need for an autopsy given his extended illness. Perfect. Douglas was already on his phone, texting rapidly. The insurance companies will need the certificate immediately. The sooner we file, the sooner we can settle the estate. They discussed my disposal with less emotion than ordering takeout. Jennifer called the funeral director, confirming arrangements they'd clearly made days ago. Douglas contacted the insurance companies, his voice switching between grief-stricken son and efficient executor. Yes, I understand there's a waiting period, he said to one agent. But surely given the circumstances. I see. Well, we'll need the death benefits to cover funeral expenses. Between calls, they couldn't resist celebrating. Jennifer opened a bottle of champagne she'd actually brought in her purse, pouring it into hospital cups. To freedom, she toasted quietly. To 3 million reasons to celebrate, Douglas corrected, clinking his cup against hers. They drank beside my corpse-planning vacations and shopping sprees. Jennifer showed Douglas photos of a beach house in Malibu she wanted to buy. He countered with yacht listings from the Mediterranean. We should wait at least 6 months before any major purchases, he cautioned. Need to play the grieving family for a while. 6 months. Jennifer pouted. I've been playing devoted wife to you for 7 years. I think I've earned a shopping spree. You'll get your money, Douglas snapped. Just stick to the plan. Besides, you'll be busy playing the tragic widow falling for her late father-in-law's doctor. Try to keep your hands off Harrison until after the funeral. Through it all, I remained perfectly still, the supposed dead patriarch whose lifetime of work was being carved up by vultures. Every word was being recorded by Jake's cameras, transmitted to FBI servers, building a case that would bury them all. Brian arrived an hour later, playing his part brilliantly. He stumbled through the door, disheveled and distraught, tears streaming down his face. No. He pushed past Douglas to my bedside. Dad, please, I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry. His performance was so convincing, I almost believed it myself. He collapsed beside my bed, sobbing into the sheets. Pull yourself together, Douglas sneered. You're making a scene. Our father is dead and you're worried about a scene. Brian stood facing his brother with perfectly feigned rage. Where were you when he needed you? I've been here every single day while you played artist in Portland. You've been here counting his money, Brian shot back. I know what you're really after, Douglas. Dad told me about the will. You think you're getting everything, but he saw through you. It was a risky move, provoking Douglas, but it worked perfectly. My eldest son's face contorted with fury. You little parasite, he snarled, shoving Brian backward. You've always been jealous, always trying to poison Dad against me. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter what he told you. I have power of attorney. I have the signed documents. You get nothing. We'll see about that, Brian shouted. I'm calling Sam Goldstein. I'm calling everyone. You're not getting away with this. Security arrived, drawn by the commotion. Douglas played the concerned brother, asking them to escort Brian out. He's distraught, Douglas said smoothly. Grief makes people say terrible things. Please make sure he gets somewhere safe. Brian fought them, screaming accusations as they dragged him away. You killed him! You killed them both! I'll prove it! After he was gone, Douglas shook his head sadly for the nurse's benefit. Poor Brian. He's always been unstable. I hope he gets the help he needs. But I saw him exchange a worried glance with Jennifer. Brian had planted the seed of doubt exactly as planned. The funeral home attendants arrived at midnight, wheeling in their gurney with practiced efficiency. I'd been transferred to a body bag, the zipper left slightly open for air, thanks to Marcus's subtle intervention. As they loaded me for transport, I heard Douglas giving final instructions. Remember closed casket? No viewing hours. Family only at the service. Of course, Mr. Murray, the funeral director replied. We'll take excellent care of your father. The ride in the hearse was surreal, listening to the attendants discuss their weekend plans while I played corpse in the back. At the funeral home, more of Jake's people were waiting. The moment we were inside, they whisked me to a hidden room where I could watch everything on monitors. Your boy just made his biggest mistake, Agent David said, showing me footage from Douglas's house. He's already trying to access your accounts even before the death certificate is filed. We've got him on attempted wire fraud conspiracy and about 12 other federal charges. I watched my son at his computer growing increasingly frustrated as every account showed as frozen or inaccessible. Why isn't this working? He raged at Jennifer over the phone. The passwords were supposed to transfer with the power of attorney. Maybe the bank needs the death certificate first, she suggested. No, something's wrong. It's like someone changed everything. The panic in his voice was music to my ears. For the first time in months, he was the one feeling helpless. The next morning, my body was prepared for viewing by select family members before the supposed cremation. In reality, I was watching from a concealed room as Douglas arrived early alone. He stood before the closed casket, not in grief but in frustration. You old bastard, he muttered. What did you do? Where's the money? He actually tried to open the casket, but it was locked. His hand slammed against the polished wood. Even dead, you're trying to control everything. Well, I'll figure it out. I always do. I got away with Mom, didn't I? There it was. The confession we needed recorded in crystal clear audio and video. He'd just admitted to murdering Martha. As more family arrived for the service, I prepared for the grand finale. Jake's team had outdone themselves. The funeral home's main chapel was wired with cameras and screens ready to broadcast the truth to everyone who mattered. My brother Charles flew in from Florida. Martha's sister Grace came from Texas. Business partners, golf buddies, neighbors all gathered to say goodbye to Murray Thompson. And every single one of them was about to witness the performance of a lifetime. The Riverside Country Club had never hosted a funeral quite like mine. Douglas had insisted on using the grand ballroom, wanting to showcase his grief to the maximum number of witnesses. 300 chairs faced a raised platform where my mahogany casket sat surrounded by white roses, Martha's favorite flowers, a detail that made my blood boil, knowing her killer had arranged them. From my concealed position in the AV control room above the ballroom, I watched the crowd gather. Jake sat in the back row, earpiece in place, coordinating with the FBI agents scattered throughout the room, disguised as mourners. Brian had positioned himself on the far side away from Douglas, but with a clear view of everything. Agent David stood near the exit, ready to signal his team when the moment came. Douglas worked the room like a politician, accepting condolences with practiced sorrow. He wore the same black suit he'd worn to Martha's funeral, probably thinking it brought him luck. "Thank you for coming," he repeated to each arrival. Dad would be so touched by this turnout. Jennifer played her part, flawlessly dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief, her black dress revealing just enough to be inappropriate at a funeral. Dr. Harrison stood near her, maintaining professional distance, while their fingers occasionally brushed when they thought no one was looking. My brother Charles, a retired Marine colonel, studied Douglas with undisguised suspicion. He'd never liked my eldest son, calling him too smooth like a snake oil salesman. If only I'd listened. "Hummed? Beautiful service," Douglas said, approaching the podium as organ music filled the air. If everyone could take their seats, we'll begin celebrating my father's incredible life." The crowd settled tissues ready, expecting a standard memorial. They had no idea what was coming. Douglas began his eulogy with stories about my early days in construction, painting himself as the devoted son who'd learned the value of hard work at his father's knee. Fiction mixed with just enough truth to sound believable. "My father taught me everything," he said, voice-catching with fake emotion. "How to read a blueprint, how to shake a hand with conviction, how to build something from nothing. How to sign your name on documents," I thought, bitterly. "How to access your bank accounts. When Mom got sick," he continued, "Dad showed me what real love looked like. He never left her side, never complained about the cost of treatments, never gave up hope even when the doctors did." Several people wiped away tears. Martha's sister, Grace, gripped her husband's hand, remembering her baby sister's final days. "After we lost Mom, I knew I had to step up. Dad needed someone to lean on, someone to help carry the burden. I moved my family back from Boston, gave up opportunities at the firm because family comes first." Brian shifted in his seat. We'd found out Douglas had been fired 2 weeks before announcing his selfless return home. These last few months watching him fight this illness, sitting by his bedside every single day. Douglas paused, producing a theatrical sob. "I'm sorry. It's just, I thought we'd have more time." Jennifer stood moving to comfort him, playing the supporting wife perfectly. They embraced at the podium, a touching tableau of grief that made me sick. My father's last words to me. Douglas composed himself. Were about taking care of the family legacy. He wanted to make sure everyone was provided for, that his life's work would continue. "And I promise you, Dad, I will honor those wishes." He was about to continue when the screens around the room flickered to life. Douglas froze, looking to the AV technician who shrugged, playing confused. The first image appeared, Douglas entering my hospital room at 10:30 p.m., checking to make sure I was alone. "What is this?" someone whispered. Then came the audio crystal clear through the room's sound system. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you've lived a good life. Longer than most. It's time." The crowd gasped as they watched Douglas unplug my oxygen machine. Several people stood, unable to believe what they were seeing. On screen, Douglas leaned over my apparently unconscious form. "This is your last breath, Dad," Martha's sister screamed. My brother Charles was already moving toward the platform, held back by other mourners. Douglas stood frozen at the podium, face draining of color as his confession played for everyone to hear. "It's done. He'll be gone within minutes. $3 million in life insurance. The properties transfer automatically." "Turn it off," Douglas shouted at the technician. "This is fake. Someone's trying to frame me." But the recording continued relentlessly. The crowd heard about the poisoning, the forged documents, the plan to contest Brian's inheritance. They heard him laugh about being the perfect son, calling me an insufferable old fool. When Jennifer appeared on screen discussing her affair with Dr. Harrison and their plan to play grieving widow and devoted doctor, Harrison tried to flee. Agent David's team stopped him at the door. The killing blow came when Douglas's voice filled the room, admitting to Martha's murder. "Amazing what a little something extra in his food can do. Weakens the immune system, makes a minor infection life-threatening. 6 weeks of careful dosing, and here we are." Grace collapsed, wailing for her murdered sister. Charles broke free from restraint, charging toward Douglas with military precision. FBI agents intercepted him just in time. "Oh, he lies?" Douglas screamed, backing away from the podium. "This is all lies. Brian did this. He's trying to steal everything." That's when I made my entrance. Jake had rigged the casket with a special latch system. As Douglas retreated toward it, still denying everything, I pushed open the lid and sat up. "Surprise, ungrateful son?" The ballroom erupted. People screamed, some fleeing, others frozen in shock. One elderly woman fainted. Douglas stumbled backward. Fell, scrambled away on his hands and knees like the coward he was. "No," he whispered. "No, you're dead. I watched you die. You watched me play dead. I corrected, standing with Jake's assistance. Just like you watched your mother die after poisoning her. The difference is I knew what you were doing. Jennifer tried to run, but Brian blocked her path. Going somewhere, sis. FBI agents flooded in from every entrance, badges, out weapons visible. The funeral had become a crime scene. Douglas Thompson, Agent David announced, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The list went on. Douglas didn't hear it. He was staring at me, the perfect mask finally shattered completely, revealing the monster beneath. How, he asked. Your mother called Brian before she died. I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. She suspected something was wrong with the vitamins you gave her. We had her body exhumed last week. The arsenic levels were through the roof. You can't prove I gave her anything. Your fingerprints were on the vitamin bottles we recovered from storage, Jake announced. Same prints on the containers of poison found in your home office. You really should have burned everything instead of keeping trophies. Dr. Harrison cracked first. It was all Douglas, he shouted. He threatened to expose my debts if I didn't help. I never wanted anyone to die. Shut up! Jennifer screeched, realizing her lover was throwing her under the bus. We had a deal. As the FBI cuffed them one by one, Douglas made a final desperate plea. Dad, please think of your grandchildren. They need their father. They need to be protected from their father, I replied. Don't worry, I'll make sure they know the truth about what you did to their grandmother and tried to do to me. The crowd parted as they led Douglas away. Some of my friends applauded. Others stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Grace approached me slowly, tears streaming. Murray, is it really you? It's me, Grace. I'm so sorry about Martha. If I'd known... She collapsed into my arms, sobbing for her sister while I held her, my own tears finally coming. We'd gotten justice, but it couldn't bring Martha back. Charles gripped my shoulder with military solidarity. You magnificent bastard. You actually pulled it off. With a lot of help. I nodded to Jake Bryan and the federal agents. Turns out the apple did fall far from the tree. It rolled all the way to hell. As the ballroom cleared crime scene tape going up, reporters gathering outside, I stood before Martha's portrait we'd displayed beside the casket. I got him, sweetheart, I whispered. He'll never hurt anyone again. Brian joined me, his own eyes red with tears. She'd be proud of you, Dad. Of both of us. I pulled my surviving son close, grateful beyond words that not everything in my life had been a lie. We had work ahead, healing to do, grandchildren to raise. But first I had a promise to keep to Martha. Douglas would face justice for everything he'd done. The silent wolf had caught his prey. Now it was time for the reckoning. The story dominated headlines for weeks. Dead man walking father fakes death to catch killer son. The funeral sting, how one man exposed a family murder plot. CNN actually sent Anderson Cooper to interview me, though I declined. I had more important things to focus on than fame. The trial was set for spring, giving prosecutors time to build their cases. Douglas faced 27 federal charges and 16 state charges, including first-degree murder for Martha, attempted murder for me, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and poisoning. Jennifer was charged as an accomplice. Dr. Harrison pled guilty immediately in exchange for testimony. But my immediate concern was Emma and Ryan, my grandchildren, who'd lost both parents in one devastating blow. Social services brought them to me the day after the funeral fiasco, two shell-shocked kids carrying garbage bags of hastily packed belongings. Grandpa! 12-year-old Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Are you really alive? I'm alive, sweetheart. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. 10-year-old Ryan hadn't spoken since watching his father arrested on live television. He clutched a worn teddy bear, eyes hollow with confusion and grief. Brian moved back immediately, taking leave from his art gallery to help. We converted Douglas's old room into a bright space for Emma, while Ryan chose the guest room overlooking the garden where Martha used to grow tomatoes. Those first weeks were brutal. Emma had nightmares, waking up screaming for parents who couldn't answer. Ryan started therapy but remained silent, communicating only through nods and head shakes. I hired Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, who worked with both children daily. "They're processing not just loss but betrayal," she explained. "Their entire worldview has shattered. It will take time." Meanwhile, Jake's investigation continued, uncovering the depths of Douglas's deception. The forensic accountants found he'd stolen over $800,000 through elaborate schemes, forging my signature on loans selling property I didn't know I owned, billing fake invoices to my company. "Your boy was busy," Jake reported over coffee one morning. "We found 3 other gambling debts, 2 mistresses, and a Ponzi scheme he was running on the side. Jennifer didn't even know about half of it." The worst discovery came when we examined Martha's medical records with fresh eyes. Dr. Marcus Fitzgerald, an oncologist from Johns Hopkins, reviewed everything at my request. "Mrs. Thompson's cancer was responding well to treatment," he concluded. "These arsenic levels would have accelerated organ failure, making it appear the cancer had spread aggressively. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." I shared the report with Grace, who took it to mean her sister had been murdered just when she might have beaten cancer. We held a second memorial for Martha, a small gathering of family who truly loved her, where we could grieve without Douglas's shadow. The trial began in April. I testified for 3 days, reliving every moment of that night in the hospital, explaining how I'd discovered the plot, detailing the evidence we'd gathered. The prosecution played the recordings repeatedly, Douglas's voice filling the courtroom with his own condemnation. Douglas took the stand in his own defense, a catastrophic decision his lawyer couldn't talk him out of. He tried to paint himself as a devoted son, driven to desperation by my favoritism toward Brian, by business pressures, by Jennifer's demands. The jury didn't buy a word. "You gave him everything," the prosecutor pressed. "Education, opportunities, love. How is that favoritism?" "He never respected me." Douglas exploded his mask, finally gone forever. "It was always about Brian's art, Brian's sensitivity. I brought home straight A's and he'd ask if I'd made any friends. I got into Harvard and he worried I was working too hard." "So you killed your mother?" "I never meant. She was supposed to have more time. I just needed the inheritance to pay debts, to keep Jennifer happy, to maintain the life Dad expected me to live." The life he expected? Or the life you felt entitled to? Douglas broke down then, not in remorse, but in rage at being caught. The jury saw him for what he was, a narcissist who'd murdered his mother and tried to murder his father for money. They deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, victims gave impact statements. Grace spoke about losing her sister twice, once to death, and again to the knowledge she'd been murdered. Brian talked about growing up in Douglas's shadow, always knowing something was wrong, but never imagining this depth of evil. Emma wrote a letter the prosecutor read aloud, asking why her daddy had turned into a monster. I gave my statement last. "Douglas, you were my pride and joy. Every achievement, every success I celebrated as proof I'd been a good father. When you killed your mother, you didn't just take her life. You stole our past, poisoned every happy memory with the knowledge of what you really were. You spent weeks watching me suffer, bringing me poisoned food with a smile, planning my funeral, while I fought for each breath. You comforted your children about losing their grandfather, while actively trying to make them orphans. I failed you somehow. Maybe I loved you too much, or not in the right way. Maybe I was blind to warning signs, too eager to see the son I wanted instead of the one you were. For that, I'd take responsibility. But your choices were yours alone. You chose greed over love, murder over patience, lies over truth. You destroyed our family for money that was always going to be yours anyway. Martha and I would have given you everything. All you had to do was wait. I'll raise your children to be nothing like you. They'll know love without conditions, support without expectations, and truth without masks. They'll learn from your example, as a warning, not a guide. I forgive you, Douglas, not for your sake, but for mine and for your children. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You're already dead to us. This is just the funeral. The judge sentenced Douglas to life without parole for Martha's murder, plus 45 years for the other charges. Jennifer got 20 years. Dr. Harrison received 10 years and lost his medical license permanently. As they led Douglas away, he turned back once, meeting my eyes. For a split second, I saw my little boy, who used to fall asleep in my arms after bedtime stories. Then the moment passed, and I saw only the stranger he'd become. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a brief statement about justice for Martha and protecting elderly victims. Then Brian and I escorted the children away from the cameras. Emma held my hand tightly, while Ryan walked close to Brian, still silent, but no longer alone. The drive home was quiet until Emma asked, "Grandpa, did Daddy ever love us?" "I think he loved you the only way he knew how," I answered carefully. "But sometimes people get so lost in wanting things that they forget what really matters. Your daddy forgot that money can't buy happiness, that family isn't about what you can get, but what you can give." "I don't want to be like him," Ryan whispered, his first words in months. "You won't be," Brian assured him. "You're already braver than he ever was. You're facing the truth instead of running from it." Back home, we found Jake waiting with champagne and sparkling cider for the kids. "To justice," he toasted, "and to new beginnings." That night, I showed the children photo albums from before Douglas lost his way. Pictures of their grandmother teaching their father to bake cookies, of family camping trips, where Douglas had been genuinely happy, of moments when love mattered more than money. "This is the part worth remembering," I told them. "People aren't all good or all bad. Your father made terrible choices, but you come from more than just him. You have your grandmother's kindness, your Uncle Brian's creativity, and hopefully a little of my stubbornness to do the right thing." Emma leaned against me. "Will you tell us more stories about Grandma?" "Every day if you want." Ryan looked up from a photo of Martha holding baby Douglas. "Do you think she would have forgiven him?" I considered lying, making it easier, but these children had been lied to enough. "I don't know," I admitted. "But she would have loved you both no matter what. That's what real love does. It stays strong even when everything else falls apart." As weeks turned to months, we built new routines. Brian taught both kids to paint, discovering Emma had real talent for watercolors. Ryan joined the school orchestra, finding voice through violin when words still came hard. I returned to work part-time, showing them the business their father had tried to steal, teaching them it was built on handshakes and trust, not contracts and deception. The foundation I'd mentioned at sentencing became real. The Thompson Center for Elder Protection opened a year after the trial, offering resources for families, training for caregivers, and support for victims. Grace ran it with military precision, inherited from her sister's quiet strength. Douglas wrote me exactly once from prison, a 10-page letter alternating between apology and accusation. I read it, filed it away, and never responded. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. But I did ensure he received photos of his children's milestones. Emma winning the state art competition, Ryan's first violin solo, both of them laughing at Brian's wedding to a fellow artist named Patricia, who embraced instant motherhood with grace. Not to torture him, but to show him what he'd thrown away. What he could have been part of if he'd chosen love over greed, patience over murder, truth over lies. The warden told me later that Douglas kept those photos in his cell. Maybe somewhere in whatever soul he had left, he finally understood the cost of his choices. Or maybe not. Some people never learn. But we did. We learned to trust carefully but love freely. To see warning signs without becoming paranoid. to value each other more than any amount of money. Most importantly, we learned that family isn't just blood, it's choice, commitment, and showing up when it matters. Douglas had failed that test. But in failing, he'd taught us how to pass it. 5 years have passed since I sat up in that casket and reclaimed my life from the son who tried to steal it. 5 years of healing, growing, and building something beautiful from the ashes Douglas left behind. This morning I woke to the sound of violin music drifting through the house. Ryan, now 15, practices every dawn, filling our home with melodies that would have made Martha weep with joy. He's first chair in the State Youth Orchestra and has been accepted to Interlochen Arts Academy for next summer. "Grandpa, you're going to be late," Emma called from the kitchen where she was making breakfast. At 17, she's become the heart of our household, her mother's organizational skills put to better use than Jennifer ever managed. Today was visiting day. Once a month, rain or shine, I drive the 3 hours to Fairfield Maximum Security Prison to see Douglas. Not for his sake, but for his children's. They deserve to know I tried, that forgiveness is possible even when trust is not. Brian joined me this time. His wedding ring caught the morning light as he drove Patricia, staying home with their twins, Martha and Murray, named for the grandparents they'd never meet, but whose legacy they'd carry. "You don't have to do this anymore," Brian said as the prison walls came into view. "The kids are old enough to understand if you stop." "I know, but I need to see it through. For Martha." The visiting room hadn't changed. Same gray walls, same scarred tables, same smell of industrial disinfectant failing to mask desperation. Douglas shuffled in wearing orange, his Harvard posture finally broken by years of looking over his shoulder. He'd aged 20 years in 5 gray, threading through hair that had been salon-perfect lines carved by regret or just the wearing away of masks. When he sat, his hands shook slightly. The gambling debts had followed him inside. Some creditors have long memories and creative collection methods. "Hello, son." "Dad." "Brian." He nodded to each of us, no longer pretending warmth he couldn't feel. "How are the kids?" I pulled out photos, spreading them across the table. Emma at her easel painting a portrait of Martha from memory that had won first place at the county fair. Ryan performing at Carnegie Hall with the youth orchestra, his face luminous with concentration. Both of them at Brian's wedding, dancing and laughing like normal teenagers who hadn't been shattered and rebuilt. Ryan started talking regularly about 2 years ago, I told him. Complete sentences, jokes even. His therapist says music gave him a way to process trauma that words couldn't reach. "And Emma got into rest," Brian added. "Full scholarship for their pre-college program. She's thinking about art therapy as a career, helping kids like her work through difficult experiences." Douglas studied each photo with an intensity that might have been love or might have been the desperate memorization of a man with nothing else to fill his days. "I dream about her sometimes," he said quietly. "Mom, she just looks at me with these sad eyes and doesn't say anything. Doesn't need to." It was the closest he'd come to admitting guilt beyond the legal definition. I waited, but he'd learned economy with truth, parceling out glimpses of humanity like a miser with gold coins. "Your mother would want you to make something of the time you have left," I finally said. "Even in here." "I teach literacy classes," he offered. "Basic education for inmates who never finished school. Turns out I'm good at it." "Who knew?" "Martha knew," Brian said sharply. "She always said you'd make a good teacher if you could get over yourself long enough to care about other people." Douglas flinched but didn't argue. Prison had taught him to pick his battles. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket. A guard tensed, then relaxed as Douglas pulled out a folded paper. "I've been working with the FBI testifying about the gambling ring that got me into this. Helped them shut down operations in 3 states. I read the official commendation, noting the reduced sentence recommendation that would still leave him inside for decades." "Trying to earn time off?" Brian asked coldly. "Trying to do one right thing," Douglas replied. I know it doesn't balance the scales. Nothing could. But those people destroyed families like I did. Maybe stopping them saved someone else's father, someone else's mother. We sat in silence, the weight of might-have-beens heavy between us. In another life, we might have been here, celebrating Douglas's appointment to the bench, or his children's achievements with both parents present. Instead, we sat separated by bulletproof glass and choices that couldn't be undone. Jennifer wrote me, he said suddenly. Getting out next year wants to see the kids. That'll be their choice, I said firmly. They're old enough to decide what relationships they want in their lives. Fair enough. He shifted, orange fabric rustling. Tell them I'm sorry. Not the lawyer sorry I said at trial, but real sorry. For taking their grandmother, for trying to take you, for being the kind of father they needed protection from. Tell them yourself, I suggested. Emma's been asking about writing to you. I think she needs to say things to ask questions only you can answer. His eyes widened with something that might have been hope. You'd allow that? With supervision and strict boundaries. But yes, healing doesn't come from pretending you don't exist. The guard signaled time was up. Douglas stood slowly like an old man, though he was barely 50. Hi. Dad, do you think I was always this way? Or did I become this? The question I'd asked myself 1,000 times. Was the monster always there, waiting? Or had I somehow created it with too much praise, too much pressure, too much blind trust? I think you made choices, I answered honestly. Each one led to the next until you couldn't see any other path. But they were still choices, Douglas. Own them, learn from them, maybe teach others not to make them. He nodded, shuffling back toward the steel door that would lock behind him. Douglas. I called out. He turned. Your mother loved you, despite everything. I need you to know that. She loved the boy you were and mourned the man you could have been. Something broke in his expression, then a crack in the last wall between who he'd pretended to be and who he was. He pressed his hand to the glass briefly, then was gone. The drive home was quiet until Brian spoke. You're a better man than me, Dad. I couldn't forgive him. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's for us. For the kids. Carrying hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Martha taught me that. We arrived home to find the house full of life. Patricia had invited Grace and her family for dinner. Emma was teaching the twins to finger paint while Ryan played soft jazz in the background. The kitchen smelled of pot roast Martha's recipe that Patricia had somehow perfected. How was he? Emma asked later as we cleaned dishes together. Older, sadder, maybe a little wiser. She dried a plate thoughtfully. Do you think people can really change, Grandpa? I think people can choose to be better than they were yesterday. It's not about erasing the past, but learning from it. I want to write to him, she decided. Not to forgive him, not yet, but to understand. To maybe help him understand what he took from us and what we built anyway. That's very mature of you. I had a good teacher, she smiled, bumping my shoulder. 2 good teachers, actually. You and Grandma, even though I never met her. You kept her alive for us. After dinner, I found myself in Martha's garden. Patricia and Emma had restored it, planting the same tomatoes and herbs Martha loved. Ryan often practiced here violin, singing to vegetables that seemed to grow taller in response. You did it, sweetheart, I whispered to the evening air. You always said the kids would turn out fine if we just loved them enough. You were right about that, like everything else. Brian joined me carrying 2 cups of coffee. Patricia's pregnant again, he said quietly. We haven't told anyone yet, but I wanted you to know. If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Grace Martha, if that's okay. I pulled my son close, this artist I'd once dismissed, who'd become the rock our family rebuilt itself on. Your mother would be honored. And if it's a boy, not Douglas, we said in unison, laughing despite the darkness of the joke. The Martha Thompson Center celebrated its 5th anniversary last week. We've helped over 300 families, prevented dozens of elder abuse cases, and recovered millions in stolen assets. Grace runs it like a general leading an army of compassion. I still work part-time teaching young contractors that a handshake means something, that reputation matters more than profit margins. Emma and Ryan sometimes join me on sites, learning that honest work builds more than structures. It builds character. The future stretches before us, bright with possibility. Ryan will attend Juilliard in the fall, his talent earning what Douglas tried to steal. Emma starts at RISD, her art already selling in Brian's gallery, with proceeds funding scholarships for other trauma survivors. Next month, they'll both write to their father. Not to reconcile, but to reclaim their narrative, to tell their story in their own words. I'll be there when they seal the envelopes, when they receive responses, when they process whatever comes next. Last week, a young woman called the foundation. Her daughter had noticed troubling changes in how her son-in-law treated his elderly mother. Thanks to our resources, they intervened before it became tragic. Another Martha saved another family, spared our journey. Douglas was right about one thing. I did expect a lot from him, but not money or prestige or perfect grades. I expected him to be kind, to be honest, to love his family more than himself. Simple expectations he somehow made complicated, then impossible. But his children have exceeded every hope. They've taken the worst thing that could happen and alchemized it into purpose. They visit Martha's grave every Sunday, telling her about their week, leaving drawings and sheet music among the flowers. I'll join her there someday when my work here is done. I'll tell her how Brian became the son we always had, but I was too blind to see. How her grandchildren grew strong and wise from tragedy. How Douglas finally learned remorse, even if redemption remains beyond reach. Until then, I wake each morning grateful for the second chance Douglas accidentally gave me. Every sunrise I see is one he tried to steal. Every laugh from my grandchildren is a victory over his greed. Every life saved through our foundation is Martha's legacy outlasting her killer. The wolf is silent now, justice served and peace found. In trying to destroy our family for money, Douglas revealed that what really matters can't be killed, can't be stolen, can't be measured in dollars. Love, trust, truth, family. These are the only inheritance worth leaving, the only legacy worth building. And despite everything, because of everything, ours remains unbroken. My name is Murray Thompson. I'm 73 years old. My son tried to kill me for money 5 years ago. I've never been richer in my life. Thank you for joining me on this journey of betrayal, survival, and ultimately triumph. If you've experienced similar family betrayal or elder abuse, please know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes speaking our truth is the first step toward healing. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and justice. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, please share it with them. Remember, the greatest inheritance we can leave our children isn't money. It's the example of how to live with integrity, love with wisdom, and find strength in the darkest moments. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and above all, stay true to what matters most.